Hello everyone and welcome back to our YouTube channel. This week we are reviewing Dune 1984, directed by David Lynch.
Yeah.
Also written by David Lynch.
Yeah.
Although from my understanding, I think Dino De Laurentiis probably had more creative control than David Lynch did.
Oh, yeah.
But who else was involved in this movie?
Obviously, this movie is based on the novel by Frank Herbert. Looks like it stars quite a few people.
Important people.
They're in alphabetical order on Wikipedia, but we're not going to talk about all of them. Let's see. Most importantly, Kyle MacLachlan, Patrick Stewart, Sting, Sean Young, who plays his love interest later in the movie.
Yeah.
Who else is really important? Brad Dourif is pretty important in the movie, I guess.
Max von Sydow is in the film.
Everett McGill's not pretty important. So who else we got? There's a lot of people listed on the starring list, but they're in alphabetical order. So
David Lynch makes a cameo
himself. He does.
And let's see, we have music orchestrated and conducted by Toto.
Except for the prophecy theme, which I guess is like the
main theme at the beginning.
The main theme at the beginning, yeah.
And of course,
distributed by Universal in 1984.
That's right. Apparently
hit theaters December 14th, 1984 in the United States with a runtime of 136 minutes.
And with a budget of somewhere around $40 million and a box office of maybe around
30 to 40.
40 million. So it did not really make its return on investment.
It did not.
It was a notorious flop, actually. A big budget flop. I mean, $40 million in 1984 was a huge budget.
Pretty big budget.
Huge budget.
$40 million isn't too shabby a budget nowadays.
No, a lot of filmmakers would take $40 million nowadays. So, yeah, so, this is a notorious flop. Obviously,
David Lynch is credited to this as his biggest failure in his career. Yeah. So,
although, I mean, just gross dollar amount wise, it's still his biggest.
Yeah, his biggest earner.
But, no, I mean, obviously. So, I mean, let's start with the novel. I have read the novel. It's been a few years, so I don't remember all the nitty-gritty details. So, I mean, it's the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. Very famous, obviously. I think it's very hard to adapt to a film. I think a lot of studios see it, and they're like, ooh, this could be the next Star Wars. But that's not what Dune is. Dune is a very, very high-level thinking man sci-fi, I guess. It's a lot of pondering on political issues.
I'd definitely say, just based on the movie, I've not read the book, but based on the movie, I'd say it's, at its core, a drama about political warfare between three competing factions, essentially.
Well, Dune is a lot of things. That's part of it. I mean, obviously, a large part of it is environmentalism with with Arrakis and the fact that it doesn't rain there, and Max von Sydow plays like an what do they call it, ecologist or whatever.
He got like an ecologist or something like that.
That studies weather, and I mean, obviously, his role in the film is greatly reduced, but there's a whole subplot with him and trying to get it to rain on Arrakis in the novel. There's obviously lots of undertones about warfare in the Middle East that the novel obviously is tackling. It's just very a lot of issues, a lot of socio-political issues that the book is covering. And Frank Herbert, I mean, it's a very high level, right? I mean, this may say more about me than it does about the book, but sometimes I'd have to reread the paragraphs 2 or 3 times just to even try to comprehend what Herbert was trying to get to me. So, I mean, it's definitely, it's not.
And there's also, a large subplot, or kind of, I guess, the central story about Kyle MacLachlan's character of Paul, where he's essentially like the Messiah.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a biblical epic.
Yeah.
I mean, he's definitely a Jesus figure. He's a Messiah. They literally call him a Messiah. So he's, he is Jesus in some way, shape, or form. And he, even in the same way that Jesus, was, Middle Eastern. I mean, this large part of this movie is set on a desert planet, and I mean, a lot of parallels that you could draw. He sort of dies and is resurrected when he drinks that spice liquid or whatever.
And then he leads his people,
Yeah, he leads his people.
and then
Well, just
performs quote unquote miracles.
yeah. So I mean, it is definitely a biblical epic in every sense of the word. But you know, I had seen this film on TV. I think a long time ago. It had been a long time. I didn't remember most of it.
I've never seen it.
You'd never seen it.
No.
What were some of your expectations coming in?
Based on what you had told me about the novel and the movie itself, I wasn't expecting a whole lot. You said that the novel was pretty high level sci-fi. And knowing anything about David Lynch, I was expecting this to be incomprehensible. It's slightly more comprehensible than I thought. As far as what I've seen from David Lynch, which is Twin Peaks, and then we watched Mulholland Drive last night. Actually, that's why it's back in the background.
Yeah.
Based on what I've seen so far from David Lynch, this is probably the most maybe mainstream accessible piece of filmmaking he's had.
This is pretty tame by David Lynch standards. I haven't,
For the most part, it has a pretty central structured narrative.
yeah, I mean it's plot driven, which is more than you can say for most David Lynch works. I haven't seen all of David Lynch. I've seen Twin Peaks, both the original run and the revival. I've seen Eraserhead. I've seen Blue Velvet. I've seen this Fire Walk with Me, and I've seen Mulholland Drive. So I mean, there's a few movies I haven't seen of his, but yeah, of what I've seen, this is pretty straightforward, pretty tame by his standards. I mean, you know, we watch films like Mulholland Drive. Or
Coming into this, I was like really expecting. So like Mulholland Drive last night, we were watching it. The first two acts of that film have a pretty straightforward narrative, to a degree.
Not really.
It's fairly straightforward as far as, you know. I mean, it's about her, you know, Naomi Watts' character as an actress.
Yeah.
And then like the love story between them, but then that third act is where it gets off the rails, and essentially a large portion of the movie is just imagery, and there's some dialogue in it, but it's not cohesive. It doesn't really make sense or flow in what you would consider a traditional way when it comes to a film. So
yeah, I mean, when you watch David Lynch, that's what you have to really expect. He's not about dialogue and about plot. He's about a series of semi-connected imagery and try to just get a visceral reaction out of it. It's really what David Lynch is about. But this movie, you know, he signed up with a big studio. You know, he had just got nominated for a bunch of Oscars with Elephant Man. So, I mean, so Dino was probably like, ooh, he had failed to get a few other big name directors.
Yeah, Ridley Scott had originally signed on to do this, but apparently, I think it said, I read somewhere that a family member of his died, and he needed something that he could make quicker, and Dune was going to take a while to begin production, so he opted to make Blade Runner instead, which wasn't a huge financial success for him either, but I'd say it's more, it's probably more widely accepted than Dune.
Well, it's actually a good movie.
Yeah,
there's a difference. I'm sorry to preview our thoughts, but no. He sees David Lynch. David Lynch has had some commercial success. Not only has Elephant Man got nominated for Oscars, by this point, Eraserhead had kind of been accepted into, you know, film circles as a well-made artsy movie, I guess.
I think it had been nominated for a couple Oscars as well, if I'm not mistaken.
It might have been, but anyway. So he gets David Lynch, and I think, you know, in theory, I think David Lynch would be at that time an interesting choice, a good choice to try to adapt Dune, because he's not gonna be about the space battles and stuff like a Star Wars movie.
Which is really funny because actually, I also read where George Lucas approached David Lynch to direct Return of the Jedi, and he was like, "No, that's not really my style. That's you." You do that, and so he chose to do Dune instead.
Yeah, and I don't know if a David Lynch Dune where David Lynch has full creative control would be any good or not. I think it would be more interesting to watch.
I think it would definitely be more interesting.
More intriguing. But no, I think Dino kept a very tight leash on David Lynch, and it was like, you know, this has to be mainstream accessible. I mean, you know, which. I mean, I guess we can go ahead and kind of get into the movie. it starts with a huge data. Now, the book starts, I think, kind of similarly, where the princess kind of sets up the world, but the movie starts with a huge data dump by the princess of the known galaxy or whatever, and she basically tells us everything about the rivalry between House Atreides, I'm blanking on what they're called, Harkonnen, and how the Emperor is behind the scenes manipulating things to try to get the Harkonnens to destroy the Atreides because the Emperor thinks that the Duke of Atreides could overthrow him because he's popular among the people. And then about the Arrakis and how it's called Dune and how it's the home of the spice, which the spice is what allows them to do intergalactic travel because it allows these...
They can fold space.
Allows these space guild, navigation guild creatures to, fold space to where they can travel between 2 points without moving. So, a huge data dump. I don't like data dumps.
Aaron is not a huge fan of opening monologues or just, giant exposition dumps at the very beginning of your film. He thinks it's a cheap storytelling aspect.
I think it is.
It basically assumes that you as the audience
are too stupid
to figure out what's going on in the movie.
And
which it works in some movies. There are a lot of movies that I enjoy sometimes an opening monologue or something.
Well, for example...
But when you're taking this information and you're just throwing it at people at the beginning of your movie and you're like... Me as someone who's not read the book or is not really accustomed to this kind of high... I mean, I guess this is probably not as high level as the book, obviously, but...
No, it's trying.
It's a higher level sci-fi than, say, like a Star Wars, I would say.
Yeah. At least it's reaching for more. I don't know if it gets there, but...
Yeah, it's almost kind of fantasy-esque, in my opinion, where there's a lot of lore and stuff behind it, and they're just throwing it at you, and for someone who's not accustomed to that, you're kind of sitting there like... What?
Yeah, because you end up spending the rest of the movie trying to figure it out anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't really see the point. I mean, like, for example, a movie like Star Wars. I mean, their quote-unquote data dump that we have at the beginning of those movies in the form of crawls. One, it's kind of a unique way to give it to us, which I kind of like that. And it doesn't so much serve as a data dump in that sense as it serves as just kind of a setup for the plot.
Like what happened before it or whatever.
But no, the way this does it, I mean, obviously, even if the book does it in whatever circumstance it may be, I think when you're adapting a book to a film, you got to make some changes. I think that's a change that needs to be done. But what's really bad about this movie is that throughout the whole movie, we hear the inner thoughts of the characters constantly. And
I really could have done throughout this entire movie without having people's inner monologues.
And a lot of it is
constantly
just
throughout the
obvious, movie. Like really obvious stuff. I'm like, yeah, I get it.
Like they're saying, like you'll meet a person in the movie, and then the character from the point of view that they're looking at the person that you're meeting, they'll be like, "This is blah 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 blah," and you're like, "Okay, would we not have figured that out anyway?"
Or it's just like they'll be staring at each other, and somebody will be like, "I want to kill him." I'm like,
"Yeah,
okay,
okay."
Like if you can't portray a lot of what they're telling us through inner monologue through your acting, then you failed. I mean, that's just bad acting. Which I'm not saying that they fail in their performances. I'm just... Because a lot of times I get it from their performances, but then they tell me anyway. I don't know. It's just...
Do you remember there being a lot of that, like, in
well, I mean, it's a novel.
In the novel?
It's a novel, so it's all inner monologue. I mean, that's what a novel is, I mean, for the most part. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, the novel is very introspective, and I mean, they ramble on and on and on and on and on about stuff. But anyway, so this film... So we have this data dump, and then we meet, I think, the Emperor, and he meets one of the more intriguing scenes in the film, I think, is he meets one of these navigation guild creatures, which are creatures, I don't know if they say for exactly, but I would love to assume that they maybe were human at one point.
That's what I assumed watching it.
They were over 4,000 years they've evolved to these creatures.
These weird... wormish creatures.
Yeah. And I think that actually this is where some of David Lynch comes through and I think works is through the creature design on some of these stuff, and it starts here with this navigation guild thing. I think it's an effective scene. You get to see a weird creature right out of the box. And then we go and meet the Atreides family and their servants and everything. including Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides, and his mom, who is I'm sorry if I get some of these terms wrong, a Bene Gesserit, who is a witch what they call a witch, but she basically they can
manipulate people's minds.
They use what they call the voice to control people, kind of like a mind trick in Star Wars, I guess. Yeah. And I guess they have, at least some of them have some, vision. They can see somewhat into the future, or they can see events before they unfold. To some extent, I gather from the movie. But they're mad at the mother, Jessica, because she was given instructions
that she was only to birth daughters to her husband.
Yeah, but she has given birth to the son. And, I mean, they don't really go into this too much in the movie. It goes a lot more into the book that she, deep inside, she wanted to give birth, I think, to the Kwisatz, what is it called? The Kwisatz Tesseract, no,
Haderach?
Kwisatz Haderach or whatever, or as he's called by the Freeman,
essentially the Messiah,
the Muad'Dib, and she does,
yeah,
and he's here, and
essentially their whole problem with it is the fact that she was supposed to give birth to a daughter so that her daughter could marry into the Emperor's family. That way their bloodline would continue.
And I don't know how much you gather from the movie of this, but the Bene Gesserit, they're really more or less in control of everything. They keep control of bloodlines, and they do mention bloodlines. Like they've manipulated things so they can control all the bloodlines, so they can marry people to keep the houses in order, and in an attempt to eventually give birth to this whatever Paul is, the Messiah, the Kwisatz Haderach or whatever. And I think in the book it comes across much more clear how in control, or at least how much they try to be in control of everything. But anyway, so they're replacing, by the Emperor's orders, they're replacing the Harkonnens as the people in control of Arrakis and the mining operations.
The mining of the spice.
And the Guild is unhappy about this because they see that this could be a threat to the production of the spice, which is vital to the universe. So, but there's a traitor, the Doctor, that works for the Atreides. He's actually in league with the Harkonnens because there's some contrived plot about the Harkonnens killed his wife. So in order to try to get revenge on the Harkonnens, he
is giving them information so they'll come.
Yeah, he agrees to help them to sabotage the Atreides house and get their shields down so that the Harkonnens could come in and take over and everything. And all this
really,
happens.
he's just trying to get back at the Baron or whatever.
Yeah.
And assassinate him.
Yeah, and all this happens, and he fails to kill the Baron in the end. But
he kills Brad Dourif's character, though.
He does kill Brad Dourif's character. Paul's father dies, and basically Paul and Jessica they get away, but they're stuck in the sand, the desert,
the sand.
It's everywhere.
This is no.
And essentially, that's about, I would say, roughly the halfway point of the movie. I would say
it takes place at about the hour 10 or 15 mark.
I would say everything prior to that. I mean, obviously, it's still condensed, but they follow the story of the novel pretty well, and they relay everything important in the novel pretty well. I think the second half of this movie condenses the rest of this novel.
Just like takes it and squishes it into about an hour.
All the stuff in the desert that happens after, where he goes and they become part of the Freemen, and he realizes his destiny as Muad'Dib, and all this is really condensed down. I mean, really condensed down. And I think this movie honestly really loses steam too. Like, I mean, the movie up to this point is not necessarily great or interesting in any way. It's presented pretty straightforward to you with a lot of exposition and a lot of dialogue going on, and a lot of words that most people are not going to understand because it's weird sci-fi
lingo,
and people are
making up weird words because Frank Herbert said so in the novel.
It's a lot like Lord of the Rings in that sense.
Yeah. But there's just a lot going on in like that first hour or so, and a lot of world building, kind of trying to build a world.
Attempt, yeah.
And it's pretty slow, honestly. I mean, if you are not interested in a dialogue-driven film in any way, you're going to be bored out of your mind.
And there is some Lynchian things where he had, like, Paul has visions.
Yeah, he has visions and stuff, and it's definitely very visual, and they're like surreal imagery and stuff like that. But there's not enough of that in this movie to make things interesting. Like Mulholland Drive, like the entire third act of that movie is just weird imagery, essentially, and some interesting sequences that are all cut and edited together weird, and you kind of don't know what's going on. And that made the end of that movie kind of interesting. Confusing, but interesting.
Well, I think in Mulholland Drive and other Lynch works, like, it's confusing and it doesn't make any sense, and usually by the end of the movie it still doesn't make any sense, but it's cut together in a way that you're engaged by the movie because you are trying to figure it out, and you're trying to understand what he's getting across here, because there's not that much mystery.
And even just when telling you straightforward.
Even when he does have visions, he's usually inner monologuing, explaining it to you, which
like,
that was not David Lynch's intent. It's just there's not enough mystery to keep me intrigued, and the visuals, this movie is trying visually to be like a Star Wars or
a very special effects driven sci-fi epic.
Yeah, like the Star Wars or Star Trek movies at the time.
And the effects are okay at spots. Some of it's.
I think the effects, like if you were to take the theatrical cut of the original Star Wars and you were to take the theatrical cut of this and look at them side by side, the effects are comparable, I would say, except for that shield effect.
That shield effect
is really bad
at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that seems like it's more a test to Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars was made for an $11 million budget 8 years before this or so, right?
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
You take this movie made for
four times
the budget, and
8 years later,
and you're only about at the same level passable on the effects as Star Wars. I mean,
I think a lot of their budget went to extras. There are a lot of extras. Ton of extras in this movie.
Yeah, there are.
And like you said, they had to spend like 3 months like clearing out a Mexican desert.
They hired a crew to spend 3 months or months upon months. I can't remember exactly what it said.
Yeah.
Clearing out 3 square miles of a Mexican desert.
Yeah, that couldn't have been cheap.
Clearing out completely, so they would just have rolling dunes.
I will say that the set design in this movie is really good.
I do like it, like the interior shots of rooms and stuff. They're really interesting. They feel like they're from another world, really. Yeah,
the creature design and the makeup work on, say, like the Baron, I think all that's really good.
It's done well, yeah.
Like models, like the ships and the guns they use and all of that.
I think that the worst part of the visuals comes when they're trying to do any sort of, I assume there's some CGI in this. Maybe a little. You don't think so?
It's all matting effects and animation.
Okay. That's where it struggles a lot. Some of that kind of doesn't always.
There's a lot of matting effects and some of it looks fine, some of it does not. And then the eyes, like I guess they didn't have colored contacts back in 1984, so they've done something in post where they've just kind of colored in their eyes blue.
Yeah,
it looks kind of funky. The worm. What did you think about the worms?
They're not bad. Yeah, I assume they're just a puppet.
They're just giant puppets that they've matted. When they are rear projected or matted or whatever, when they need someone to stand in front of them or whatever. The worms look fine, I guess, as creatures. But
they look like a giant worm.
Yeah, a giant worm
with the weird thing
Tremors,
that opens up.
Tremors stole this design. I mean,
I've not seen Tremors, but
now Tremors, I would say, did the creatures better.
That's fair,
but they stole the design straight up. But no, and then so the middle part of this movie, they're wandering around in the desert, and he's learning how to be the Moadib or whatever, and at some point his mom becomes the Reverend Mother of the Freeman, and she gives birth to his younger sister who's born with
All the powers.
All the powers and all the knowledge of all the Reverend Mothers that came before her, and
she grows
all of
at
this,
an accelerated rate and stuff
all
like
of this
that.
is really brushed. I mean, this is like a large part of the book. All this stuff, this is like really brushed over in this movie. I think it just doesn't work. I just think it's boring, and
it's pretty boring. I mean, I've seen much more boring movies than this. It's pretty boring.
For example, like there's one or two ways to do Dune. You can either turn it into an action movie
which would not be faithful to the book.
Which would not be faithful to the book. Well, at least it'd be a lot more exciting than this.
Yeah.
And this is not an action. I mean, there are action scenes.
Yes.
Like when they're overthrowing the Atreides house, or when they're at the end when we have our big blowout. But I wouldn't, for a 2 hour and 20-minute movie, there's not that much action in this movie.
No.
Or you could turn it into a visual feast, which more like in the vein of, say, Blade Runner, or Blade Runner 2049, which is also again like Blade Runner is. I mean,
it's a visual treat.
It's a visual treat. This movie the effects are not good enough to be a visual treat.
No, like I assume I'm intrigued to see what Denis Villeneuve can do with Dune. Apparently, he said he's going to turn it into 2 movies at least, so he can stay faithful to the novel. Apparently, it's a passion project for him, which is pretty cool. I'm interested to see if he's trying to stay that faithful. Is it gonna be boring like this, or is he gonna bring enough visual flair to it that even if you're sitting there watching this movie that's very dialogue heavy, with stretches of the movie with no action and stuff going on, that you're just like, what are they saying?
Or like,
or is it gonna be a visual treat to the eyes? Like, it's gonna be made with such visual flair that you're gonna be like, well, okay, I understand that's going on, but it's really gorgeous to look at.
Yeah, like 2001 when we talked about it. You know, it's not an action-driven movie in any sense of the word, but it's just so amazing to look at that you're not really bored during it. So I mean, but this film fails on both fronts. The action is not exciting when it does happen, and the visuals aren't. I mean, again, David Lynch. You would think that would be like,
but it seems like the production company had a bigger hand in it than he would have cared to have.
I definitely.
I think David Lynch, had he had full creative control over this movie, it might not have been a better movie, but it would have at least been visually more exciting.
Yeah. But we get to this big blowout sequence where Paul is taking he's drank the water of life. And he is become...
Which all men who drink it apparently die, but he does not.
He does not.
He's the special person.
He's the Messiah. And he becomes like all powerful. He controls the worms. And they have this big in-battle sequence where all the Freemen attack and with the worms. And the Emperor shows up with... They really downplay this, but like the Emperor shows up with like a horde of like super army soldiers. And
they wreck them.
They destroy them all. And Paul, they really condense down this ending too. Like at the end, if I'm remembering correctly, at the end of Dune, we have this scene where he and the Emperor and all the main people are facing off, and he fights with Sting, with Fade.
Sting's character.
And he wins, and then
he makes it rain.
He makes it rain, but then they go on to tell about how he married the princess. And basically became ruler of the empire.
So you're telling me at the end of this book, he's been with this chick?
Well, no, he stays with what's her name, Chani or whatever.
Something like that.
He stays with her. Like that's his like real wife, but like for like legal purposes or whatever you want to say, he marries the princess, and so he can become ruler of the empire or whatever.
Interesting.
Which they cut all this off before, and that's all at the very end of the book too. But they cut all that off, and they don't even bother trying to get into that in this movie. I'm probably because the studio was like, all right, we're at about 2 hours and 15 minutes here. We gotta cut this thing off. So, in conclusion, I mean, it's just not that great of it. it's not that great of a film.
It's really not. It's not presented in a way that is all that interesting or
Yeah.
intriguing. It's really just a bunch of exposition dumped
Yeah.
in your face for about 2 hours, and the last 15 minutes has some action. I mean, there's like one or two action sequences, very short, sprinkled in between that 2 hours. But for the most part, the first 2 hours of this movie is essentially just exposition.
Yeah. So with that being said, buy it, stream it, or skip it.
If you're a fan of sci-fi, I don't know why I'm saying that, but if you're a fan of sci-fi and you're a fan of David Lynch and you just want to watch all of his works, I'd say maybe a very low stream it. But I think I'm just going to say skip it.
Skip it. Yeah, I agree. I mean,
Maybe a high skip it. I mean, if you got really, honestly, literally zero else better to do and you want to see all of David Lynch's filmography, sure, watch it. But other than that, there's really not a whole reason to watch this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like we've said, I mean, it's, it is interesting in a sense, like what happens when you try to adapt Dune to a movie, and it's a David Lynch movie, which are two things you think would mingle together well, or at least in an interesting way. But I think this movie falls flat in most areas.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, there's some creatures that look cool. There's some makeup effects. I like the performance of the guy playing Baron Harkonnen. I think he's off his rocker, and I think they do a great job of making you hate the Harkonnens. Like, they're
And
gross
he's disgusting.
and there's a scene where he maybe molests a young teenage kid that's kind of off-putting, but I mean, yeah. So and also Sting, who plays Faye. I mean, he's very just very full of himself and easy to hate, which I think they do that well. But I don't care about our protagonists. Like,
Not really.
in the book too, I thought this Paul kind of came off as kind of cold, and I didn't really like him as a protagonist. And it's the same here. I don't like the character of Jessica as much in this movie as I did in the book. I feel like in the movie they kind of made her into the more typical. I mean, she does some cool things, but she's also kind of got that damsel in distress element to her in parts of the movie that I don't.
And really, she just plays the part of essentially Mary. She's just in the movie. She's essentially just there to give birth to Messiah, and that's what she's there for.
Yeah.
And she's the Messiah's mother throughout the movie. Just kind of walks him through life.
Yeah. And I think they really, I think, fell in the part of the Freeman. They could have done some cool things with the Freeman, but they're just basically a bunch of white people just in funky outfits. Like, I mean, in my head when I was reading the book, I was thinking, okay, they're probably kind of dark-skinned because they're all on this desert planet. They're probably kind of small because it's a planet short on water, so they're not going to be these huge 6-foot-tall people, But here they just kind of took some people and they just kind of put some funky outfits and colored their eyes blue. I think they really fell down flat on that. So visually as a whole, this movie, I mean, there's some cool looking spaceships and set design and stuff, but the effects aren't anything to write home about, especially for a $40 million production.
No.
So yeah, and the worms, I'm big on creatures. I love giant monsters and creature features and all that. And the worms don't look terrible. And the effects when they do the worms don't look terrible most of the time, but they're not anything. Just there's no scene with a worm that I'm just like, oh wow, that's amazing. I like the scene where we first see a worm swallow the mining operation or whatever. That's probably the coolest scene with a worm in it. But aside from that, I'm just never just like blown away by the worms.
No.
So I think
You'd think for $40 million they'd be able to do more, but my guess is most of their budget went to finding a large location that they could film on location and getting a bunch of extras for this movie.
Yeah, I agree.
And then paying some decent actors.
Well, yeah. Now a lot of these name brand actors that we know now weren't
At the time. They weren't.
Like
huge
Patrick
actors.
Stewart was not. This was before TNG. Brad Dourif was not a name at this point. Kyle MacLachlan was not a name at this point. So most of these people were not really names at this point. But that being said, obviously I'm gonna say skip it. I don't think it's. There's so many better sci-fi epics out there that you could watch, like we mentioned, 2001 Blade Runner or Star Wars even at the time. From that era that you can watch, I think that this is definitely not, unless you're just a completionist and you really want to see all David Lynch's works, or you love the novel Dune and you want to see their attempt at making it into a film. Otherwise, it's just not really worth your time, especially for a movie that's like 140 minutes long or whatever.
Yeah,
So
it's probably
yeah. So, but that being said, maybe we'll enjoy the movie next time a little bit more.
Maybe. Well, I mean, I'm like I said, I'm really interested to see what Denis Villeneuve can do. I really enjoy Arrival. Not to spoil my thoughts on Arrival when we get to that film here in a few weeks. But I like that movie.
I like Blade Runner 2049.
I haven't seen Blade Runner 2049 yet. I have it. I need to watch it at some point. I really enjoyed Prisoners that he did. Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal is really good. So he's a very talented director, and he can do visuals well. Like he can do visual, and he can do visual sci-fi.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see his interpretation of it. Not that I'm gonna read the book.
Yeah.
But I really hope that he can bring a visual flair to it that will make it pretty to look at least for 2 hours or whatever. Even if the dialogue is boring like this movie, at least I'll have something gorgeous to look at on screen.
I don't think he's great at plotting. If you watch Arrival or you watch 2049, plots, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Kind of like David Lynch in that way, I guess. But yeah, he's definitely got that visual flair that I think Dune requires. And there's a great cast along with it too.
Huge cast.
I guess, moving on past Dune, next time you see us, we're going to be reviewing Independence Day, which is a much different sci-fi film.
That's Roland Emmerich at the height of his career right there.
Yeah, his peak, I would say, definitely. Most definitely. But other than that, I think that's all we got for you for this episode.
Yeah, make sure you check out our most recent videos. We have recently published our episode over Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And Batman Begins has been put up here pretty recently. Next month, make sure you keep a lookout for The Prestige. And we also have another podcast, if Aaron wants to plug that real quick.
Yeah, we also have another podcast called Stomp This Way, where we review a different giant monster movie every week. So if you just love listening to our voices, you can check us out over there.
Speaking of Roland Emmerich, here in about 2 weeks, if you're interested, we're going to be doing a live stream commentary / riff
maybe
on the 1998 Roland Emmerich Godzilla for that show. So it should be a fun time. I'm interested. I've not seen that version of Godzilla either, and seeing the 20 plus movies that have led up to it, I'm interested.
Yeah, it's definitely an experience. But other than that, thank you guys for tuning in. Please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next time.